we are seated. Okay, if you can start finding your seats, please. We have a few people in the lobby, but I think we're going to go ahead and start. Well, good evening and welcome to the FM1431 community meeting sponsored by the North Lake Travis Chamber of Commerce. My name is Imelda Fott and I'm the Chamber Board President. Before we start tonight's agenda, I would actually like to introduce some of the key individuals who play a pivotal role in our organization. When I call your name, just wave. You're out there somewhere. We have our Chamber Board Vice President, Justin Laux. In the dark, in the shadows, that's weird. Our Treasurer, Mr. Bill Phipps. I just saw him, there he is. And we also have our Lago Vista ISD Superintendent, Mr. Darren Webb, and Emily Diekman. Our ambassadors that are here tonight, I think are outside, but we've got Cal Coburn and also Barbara Shalou. I also want to remind everyone that on October the 11th, we will once again be hosting a Meet the Candidates of Lago Vista event here at the PAC Center. And this event offers a unique opportunity for us to engage with the candidates who are vying for positions of leadership and influence within our community. So we encourage everyone to submit your questions for these candidates. The deadline to submit your questions is October the 1st, and we should have a QR code somewhere that'll send you directly to the question submission form. At this time, I would like to turn the floor over to one of our esteemed guests, someone who has been a dedicated advocate and a tireless public servant. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Ann Howard, Travis County Commissioner, Precinct 3.
Thank you very much, and a really warm, generous thank you to the North Lake Chamber for getting us all together. If we're squinting or making weird faces, it's because it's just hard to see you, and we want to see you, but we've got a little bit of light blaring in our eyes. So this is an important gathering, and I think you can tell by the number of people we've invited to sit up front that we all take this seriously, because it's just really important that something happens to make 1431 safer. You guys have been working on this long before there was a twinkle in my eye to run for county commissioner, and so I'm not trying to be anything other than, the person who helps bring together the people who work on roads in our community every day, and the first responders who know what happens out here every day. Just by looking at the addition, the construction going on to the high school, you know what's going on in Central Texas. Growth is everywhere. And it can be exciting. We were just at the burger bar. You know, it's fun to have something new and good to eat. But all of that change and growth just puts a lot more responsibility and challenge on folks sitting up here in front of you. And it challenges all of us. It challenges our way of life, and it also challenges how we're going to live together. So tonight, we've gathered a lot of questions, but first we're going to hear from, our partners in this work. From TxDOT, 1431 is a state road, and from CAMPO, the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, that helps funnel, I don't know if that's the right, she'll tell you the right words, but the way I see it, it's how we at the local communities get the money to our projects. It's federal dollars and state dollars, and it's a regional planning body. I'm joined up here tonight, I'm not going to introduce everybody at one time, but I'm joined up here tonight by my colleague, Bridget Shea, who's the Commissioner for Precinct 2 in Travis County, which now includes the city of Lago Vista. So you have two of us, because my responsibility is all around Lago Vista, Jonestown, and out, by the Wildlife Refuge and Singleton Bend. But Commissioner Shea, who's very experienced in a lot of these challenges we're talking about tonight, is the Lago Vista Commissioner. And between the two of us, y'all ought to get a lot of good attention. So we're going to start tonight with some remarks from TxDOT, from David John Peters. I'm starting off good. And I want you to know that my first conversation with him was some ladies off the Nameless School Road begged me to fill a pothole. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to fill a pothole, but I'm going to call TxDOT. And there were construction guys from TxDOT on 1431 that very day. And he said, I think we can take care of that tomorrow. And that stuff is called hot mix that you fill a hole with. And I thought that was the funnest thing I've ever done so far, is to get some hot mix put in that pothole. So let's get going with TxDOT. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to welcome everybody here tonight. My name is John Peters, and I'm the area engineer for TxDOT out of the Georgetown area office. Tonight, I brought along my assistant area engineer, Kyle Russell, and also from the Austin District is Brenda Guerrera. She is the Austin District Director of Transportation Operation. Now, a little bit about TxDOT in the Georgetown area office. A lot of folks ask, man, what's Georgetown doing way out here in Williamson, or from Williamson County? You know, Georgetown's in the middle of Williamson County. Well, a little bit of Travis County is mine to oversee. So the Georgetown area office is just part of the Austin District, and the Austin District is made up of 11 counties. So we have 11 counties in the Austin District, and Georgetown's just a little piece of the pie. So out of Georgetown, I have 3 maintenance offices, and so we oversee the design, construction, and maintenance of the state roads within my area. And now I know most of y'all are here tonight, want to know a little bit more about 1431, and y'all drive it every day. 20,000 folks a day travel up and down 1431 in this stretch of from Cedar Park back out here to Lago. Once you get to Lago, it looks like about 14,000 of y'all turn and come down Loman's Ford to head back towards the lake. So, a lot of folks using 1431 to get to Austin, and it's kind of interesting. You take a step back and look back over the years, and it was about in 2019 that we started seeing an influx of traffic move to the area out here, right around the time COVID hit. It looked like a lot of folks started moving out here to up in, just looking at the traffic numbers, went from like 12,000 a day to now the 20,000. So you can tell in the last few years, a lot of folks have moved to this area. And this driving around, heck, Kyle and I were on 1431, driving out towards the west a little further a while ago, and saw the hillside totally bladed off, and you can only imagine what's going in over there near Tessera. A lot more homes, which means a lot more folks and a lot more concerns for us to address. So 1431 is a challenging roadway by all means from a design standpoint. We got lots of ups and downs, hills, curves. We got a lake on one side, so the grade, everything's falling off towards the lake. So it's very challenging when we go in there trying to design something for 1431. So with that, that means if it's difficult to design, it means it's going to cost more money. And if it's costing more money, that's where we run into problems sometimes, because TxDOT does have limited funding. And here in a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about funding through Campo and how we can obtain funds to up and develop future projects. You know, I've been pretty fortunate over the last few years to be able to obtain safety funding to install left turn lanes, a couple around Jonestown. One most recently was at West Reed Park Road. We were able to fund a left turn lane there. You know, that sucker back in the day was about $3 million to get that left turn lane in. And just recently, here back in June, we obtained additional safety funding to install a left turn lane from Reed Park Road, the east one, closer to Jonestown. And it's going to be segments here, but it's going to run from there all the way to Old 1431 Trail. It's a $5.3 million job. It let back in June, and that project will add a center turn lane and some amount of shoulder out there to help with, thank you. You know, I got some more good news. You know, as the funding is programmed out, was able to obtain, with Brenda's help, more safety funding. And we are going to also be able to, it's funded and programmed for January of 2025 to go to letting. We'll jump on the end of the one with the stop at Old 1431 Trail, and we'll go all the way to Destination Way. So that will capture a lot more businesses, and then also Adrian Way, you know, so some left turn lanes. It will also include left turn lane and shoulders. Now, a lot of folks ask, well, what are you doing? There's a lot of folks moving in here to the area. What are the developers up and on the hook for? So we work with the locals, Travis County, Lago Vista, Jonestown. Whenever new development comes to town, they up and have to do what we call a TIA, a traffic impact analysis. And if they are up and impacting the roadway in such a way that, let's say right now they're tying into a 2-lane road, we're going to have that developer add a left turn lane to his entrance. So Tessera is one of them that I'm going to mention there. They're going out west. They're going to be required to put in a left turn lane, a right turn lane, and ultimately they're on the hook for a signal if a signal was ever warranted. And we'll talk about signals here a little bit more. Let me get through a few other items I want to cover. We're also partnering with the city of Lago Vista. They have a new park west of town, and they're going to build a new entrance into the park and restripe 1431 where it's wide right now in order to get a left turn lane into that park that's just west here. You know, we also have great partners in the locals as enforcement. You know, the projects that we're doing, it doesn't just stop there. It's education. We got to continue to educate folks. We look at, and Brenda will talk more about incidents along 1431. You start looking at the crash history out there. A lot of it's run off the road, head-ons, they're not wearing seat belts, they're speeding, drunk driving, a multitude of things that cause those incidents. But if we can educate folks to put down their phones, stop talking and texting, drive the speed limit, that's going to help a whole lot with the incidents that are happening out there from what we're seeing. So we do lean on our local enforcement aid, our police departments to help enforce the speed limits that are posted. And they probably will get up and talk a little bit more about their goals and what their opportunities they have out there. Unfortunately, though, it is difficult for them to work roads like 1431 because there's not a lot of room for them to get out there and pull somebody over and make sure they're enforcing the law. Other than that, you know, Campo is here tonight. They'll visit about the feasibility study that that's on the books to take place from 35 to 281. And the next thing I was going to touch on was signals. A lot of folks are always wondering about signals. I've up and been asked many times, when are we going to get a signal at Destination Way? When are we going to get one at Bar K? When are we going to get one at Dodge? I think it's Dodge Trail? All right, Dodge Trail. You know, those are all great questions, and how that happens, how a signal goes in, it has to meet warrants. So we go out, we'll study. All right, I might not be the best to tell about warrants. I'm not a traffic guy, I'm more of a construction, and Brenda May can help me here in a minute, the warrants. But there's certain criteria that they look at: volumes, traffic incidents, left turn movements, right turn movements, and they go out there, they count the traffic, look at the delay, and it's a criteria they use in order to determine if an intersection would need a signal, because everybody wants a signal at their intersection to get out. Unfortunately, though, even if a signal is not always the ultimate solution, we've had accidents at signals too, and sometimes at signals, they're even worse accidents than if the signal was not there. So let me get back on track about this signal. So looking at those intersections, this last year we have performed warrant studies at all those locations that I up and mentioned, and they did not meet warrants at this time. Now, with that said, there's a lot of development going on, a lot of rooftops being built, and as those rooftops go in, we'll continue to study those locations, and once and study them, and if they meet warrants, we'll move forward with the process to install a signal. So the process to install a signal is not a quick process unless we up and have a developer that is going to fund it and pay 100% for it. So like I was saying earlier, Austin District's made up of 11 counties. Somebody calls in and says, hey John, hey Brenda, Kyle, go study the intersection over here, see if it meets warrants. We send our traffic team out. They'll up and go out with the equipment. They'll study it, do the counts, see if it meets warrants. If it meets warrants, it goes on a list. And that list is long. If you think about the 11 counties we have Travis, Bastrop, and a lot of growth happening around Williamson County. The list is long, and we put it at the bottom of the list, and we're just continually going down that list from the top to the bottom, trying to install signals where we can. If a developer comes along and they help fund it, yes, he'll move it right up to the top of that list, and we can up and let that job and install a signal a lot quicker. And that's where I was talking about earlier, those traffic impact analysis. Those up in are a great tool we have in order to make sure that the developers are doing their part to help put the safety features in that are required by the traffic that they are impacting. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to talk a little bit about the incidents on 1431 and what we're seeing from, I guess, hot spots out there.
Let's see if this fits. All right. All righty. Good evening. Again, my name is Brenda Guerra. I am with TxDOT Austin District, and I'm happy to be here with you tonight to talk about safety and some crash trends in the city of Lago Vista. Next slide. So just a little bit of background on the study. This was a desktop study, 1431, again, within the limits of the city. It's a 4.5-mile segment. Maximum speed is 55 miles an hour. And these speed limits were established back in 2003. Again, as John mentioned, there's a lot of vertical and horizontal curves. And the data that we studied was from 2018 to 2023. So here you can see a map with the crashes based on severity. There were a total of 114 crashes from 2018 to current date, 4 of those being fatal crashes. 8 crashes are suspected serious injury, B are minor injury, C are suspected injury. and N would be for no injuries. Oh, yes, next slide, sorry. There you go. So out of the 4 fatal crashes, 3 of those were runoff road crashes, and 1 involved someone leaving their lane and going into oncoming traffic. So that was a head-on collision. 2 of the fatal crashes involved motorcyclists. And again, a breakdown of the 114 crashes. The majority of the crashes that we're seeing in the area are runoff road, some rear-end collisions, and head-on. Next slide. Here's another breakdown. You can see the data differently. You can see the sum of the crashes by severity. You can also see the total number of crashes by year. Here we can also tell how many were intersection related or driveway related, and also note when the majority of the crashes are happening, typically from 7 a.m. To 7 p.m. at night, but typically during the daylight. So there seemed to be a 50-50 split between intersection and non-intersection related crashes. And thankfully, there were no pedestrian crashes. Next slide. This is another visual on how to see the data year by year. You can see it by severity and total number of crashes. You can see that we were on a decline on number of crashes in 2020. Unfortunately, there was a rise after that. And so what we have been seeing across our district and what I'm hearing across the state and the nation is that since the pandemic, speeds have increased, and with that, severity of crashes do as well. So you can see that we have 2 fatal crashes this year when other years we had none or 1. Next slide. So the manner of collision, we kind of talked about those statistics already. Here you can see how they line up. The number 1 is 1 vehicle run off road. So it doesn't involve another vehicle, so they're typically running off the road, either rolling over or hitting a fixed object. You will also notice a combination of 2 manners of collision to end up with number 2 with rear-end crashes and head-on collisions coming in after that. And so typically when it comes to single vehicle crashes and rear-end collisions, speed and distractions seem to be a factor. Next slide. Here is a list of contributing factors. So in every crash report, the responding PD will note different factors in the manner of collision in every crash. So for us, we had a focus on K, A, and B crashes. And so those are our fatal crashes, serious injury, and suspected minor injury. And so what we're seeing for our 50-50 split is that for intersection crashes, which are either angled or rear end, we're seeing about half of them due to inattention. And for non-intersection, you can see in red outlined the vast majority are due to speed. Next slide. So we also looked at, yes. This particular map shows all the crashes along the corridor within the study area. And so we did see a large concentration of crashes at the intersection of Lomans Ford Road and 1431.
That's the only signal in town, and so it has been reviewed in the past for timing issues and making sure that that heavy left turn movement is accommodated, but it's currently under study again to look at other opportunities to see what else could be done. From our desktop review, we found that about 38 crashes happened here, none of them fatal. Oh, sorry, next slide. And yes, most of the crashes were due to left-turning vehicles and rear-end collisions. So we are exploring making the left movement protected only, which may cause other delays, but we're also looking at maybe a reconfiguration of lane assignments. So that is in the works.
What's lane assignments?
Lane assignments is the direction that traffic can move. So if you have a right only or left only or through movement. And here we took a little, a deeper dive into our fatalities. Again, I had mentioned 2 of them involved motorcycles. And so for those crashes, we observed that the individuals were traveling, in this windy road at a high rate of speed, and they either continued in the direction that they were traveling or they were going to miss that particular turn. And so they lost control and, unfortunately resulted in the fatal crash. Other crashes are involved in an unsafe movement. In one occasion, one of the crashes involved someone crossing into oncoming traffic, and unfortunately they did not have their headlights on, and so the oncoming traffic did not see them either. Overall, we have looked at the limits, and we think that there are opportunities to make some adjustments. And just, so you kind of understand my role, in my position, I am over operations. So I'm looking for short-term opportunities to improve the roadways. And then as John mentioned, I'm also over the safety program. And so I manage 2 lines of funding within TxDOT that is dedicated to safety. One of the lines of funding is related to crash density and severity. And unfortunately, for both lines of funding, the buckets per year are not what you would expect. Let's just put it that way. Unfortunately, it's very small, and so we're only able to also do small projects. John mentioned turn lanes. Sometimes we're able to do small or short widening projects to add shoulders, center turn lanes, center medians, et cetera. So for this particular study, we're just looking for operational improvements, maybe doing some signage adjustments to ensure that we can address this soon. And so some of the recommendations are summarized here. So I'm sorry, next slide. For the locations where we notice speeding, we recommend having portable speed feedback signs. I did notice some on my way in, I think in Jonestown. Our district has 6 speed trailers that are also available for use. We are looking at doing a new speed study to ensure that we can relocate some of the posted speed limit signs so that they are not confusing as we're traveling in these curves where you see advisory speed signs. There's opportunities for additional signage, and I think there was mention of use of lighted signs or something of the sort. And so we can definitely look at signage with LEDs or whatever will bring, attention to the signs and our drivers see those. We talked about the left turn on Lomans Ford Road, and so that is being studied. And then we are also looking at adding a overhead flashing beacon at Destination Way. As John mentioned, it was studied. It did not meet traffic signal warrants, but there's definitely some things that we can do there as you approach that intersection, and with signage and additional warning with the flashing beacon. And so that is all that I have. I do have my education counterpart here. For TxDOT, Road to Zero is a very serious goal. We are trying to cut our fatalities in half by 2035, and we're also trying to reduce them to zero by 2050. And so we know that there's many prongs to this issue, and so we will try, our engineering recommendations and see what other solutions we can have short term. There's, our planning department, and I know Campo will also look at long-term solutions, but we also have education and enforcement. And so we do have some grants available for local PDs to have additional enforcement. And then we also have community members and organizations that can join our coalition to help us educate the public through outreach. And so I don't know, Monique, if you want to say anything about any opportunities here at Lago Vista.
Thank you, Brenda. Good evening. My name is Monique Campa. I am the traffic safety specialist for the Austin District. And thank you all for being here. Being here means that the safety is important to y'all. Like Brenda and them had said, they recommend the different things to make the road safe, but it's also, my position, the education part, is changing our behaviors. Like she mentioned, the top behavior issues for Lago Vista are speeding and distracted driving. So on my part, what I do as a TSS is I come out here and I partner with the community to bring that education out. We have different programs where we will come out and we can, if you guys have like a wellness fair or just different events that are going on, we can come out here and we can present, we can provide the education. And I know we have our speeding campaigns, distracted driving. For our teens, we have teens in the driver's seat. We also have, through a grant, we have a speaker who will come out, and his name is Tyson Deaver, who shares his experience of surviving a distracted driver. But he's really good because he comes out and he talks to our teens. And we know that, we're here, we're getting educated, but we also know that the education needs to reach our teens and even our littles because they're our future. So it's a partnership. It's something that we all have to be involved in together. Like Brenda mentioned, we have our coalition meetings and anybody can be part of the coalition. We try to get our education, EMS, our stakeholders, from the city involved because we want to hear from y'all. We have different PDs that are part of it. We have different cities, organizations within the Austin District that come together and partner, and we put out those issues. And we talk about what we're seeing out there and how can we partner together and how we can, come together and help fix our problem. So, like I said, my name is Monique Campa, and I look forward to partnering up with y'all and bringing those education programs to the city.
thank you for joining us. And the superintendent of schools, where are you? Right here. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to connect you to her so we can maybe get those teen programs going. And I realize that when we use words like statistics and limits, you know, we can forget when we're working on the science that these crashes represent sometimes our family and our neighbors, and I just don't want us to lose sight of that. I know these folks don't, and they work on this every day, but I just want us all to sort of own that when we're talking about numbers and crash data, that we all recognize those are people. Before we hear about sort of the funding for bigger projects, I want to recognize the other elected officials who are in the room. This kind of stuff doesn't happen without them. And we have Mayor of Lago Vista, Ed Tidwell. He's also a firefighter. And we have lots of our city council persons from Lago Vista. Kevin Sullivan, Shalane Marion, Paul Roberts, Paul Prince, our Mayor Pro Tem, and Rob Durbin. We also have our city manager, Tracy Lavinka. From Jonestown, we have Mayor Paul Johnson, Councilmember Eric Davis, and City Manager Steve Jones. We've got folks from EMS and the ESD. We have police officers, so thank you all for being here. We're going to keep working our way down the table. But the question I want to ask John before Joyce comes up here is, you've mentioned that, you know, a turn lane can cost $3 million or $5 million. And could you give us just an idea of, besides turn lanes that y'all can sort of patchwork and find money for, when we talk about big changes or big fixes, what would something like that be? And I know you haven't engineered it or studied it, but just because it costs so much money, are we talking about a highway, or what are we talking about?
So, you know, I think a lot of it, you know, the cheap fix is word of mouth and education. We can educate folks that use 1431 and all of our fellow Texans to make sure that they are doing what's right on the roadways to keep it safe. When we start talking about the safety projects, like I mentioned earlier, and the cost of them, I mean, it's expensive to lay hot mix. You know, they measure it by the ton. It doesn't go very far. It's around $200 a ton. I mean, we're talking about millions of dollars we're spending to resurface our roads. And we're only given a finite amount of money each year in our budget. And we have different funding categories at TxDOT. And there's like 12 different funding categories. And we could talk all night about the different funding categories. But our main one that I really have any control over at my office is our maintenance. It's our Cat 1. It's our maintenance funds, where we go out and do our overlays, maybe do a rehab on a road, do striping, refresh, we crack seal coats, those type of projects. And you know, overall, just out of our office, we're overseeing $300 million worth of construction right now. So I mean, things are expensive out there. When we start looking at corridors, and Joyce may be able to up and expand a little more, but when we look at a corridor like 1431 and doing improvements from, let's say, Cedar Park to Lago, we're talking $300 to $500 million or more to make it probably like a controlled access facility, or a 4-lane divided, or I'm not sure what it would be. That's where she can talk more about feasibility studies and how much it's cost. But we're talking a lot of money to build a large corridor, and that comes through different programs. And I'll see if she hits those. But locally, I can help, you know, maintain the potholes, crack seals. We replace stop signs when they get hit, speed limit signs, guardrail. It all adds up, and it adds up quick when we have just a minute amount of money out there, to be honest.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Joyce Myers. She's at Campo, and she's the Community Outreach Manager. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Commissioner Howard, and also to the Chamber for inviting us to be part of this conversation this evening. Commissioner Shea asked that I start with what Campo is, and that's actually my first slide because an MPO, a Metropolitan Planning Organization, isn't something that people interact with or necessarily know about on their, going about their everyday lives. So the Metropolitan Planning Organizations throughout the country, these exist in areas with a population of 50,000 or more. So the one in this area was started in 1972. It started primarily to study the transportation needs for the city of Austin. And with the regional growth, you can only imagine we're now representing 6 counties, which I'll get into in just a moment. So the main roles of the Metropolitan Planning Organization are our board actually sets the planning processes and the priorities for long-term transportation planning in this region. So we are responsible for developing a 20-year multimodal transportation program. That means looking at not only highways, roadway, vehicles, but also looking at transit facilities, walking, biking, and other modes of transportation. The other thing that is a primary responsibility for Campo is what's called our Transportation Improvement Program. You may see something called the TIP. That's that 4-year program that outlines the projects that are going to start implementation, whether that's construction or a study in that 4-year time period that the TIP outlines. So this is where you can go in and find the years that those construction projects may be beginning. You can also find the funding amounts, get a better sense of how much some of those projects do cost. Next slide, please. So a little bit more specifically about the decision makers for Campo. We've got actually a 22-member transportation policy board. This is made up of elected officials from the 6 county regions. So that's Travis, Williamson, Hayes, Caldwell, Bastrop, and Burnett counties. So you're well represented in Travis County. Judge Brown sits on our policy board, as does Commissioner Trevelyan. Commissioner Howard is part of our transportation policy board. And then Amy Patillo is a representative for the small cities in Travis County. So the cities that have achieved that 50,000 population threshold have a representative on the board. For the other cities in Travis County, you've got Ms. Patillo representing places like Lago Vista, Jonestown, and others that haven't quite hit that threshold yet. So this is the group of people that are responsible for deciding how the funding that Campo is allocated gets spent. They decide on the policies, they set the priorities for how that money is getting spent, and also what staff is looking to in the future. Next slide, please. So I think we all know that the area is growing. John was talking about the traffic counts in the past 3 years alone. I will caveat that the information that's up here, we did this as part of our 2040 plan, which was adopted in May of 2020. And a lot has changed in those 3 years. So some of these forecasts may be a little bit higher than they were, but this just gives you a sense. We're one of the fastest growing areas in the country. We've got a lot of growth happening in Williamson and Hayes counties, in western Travis County as well. And then also to our north and south, if you've driven along I-35 or even 281 recently, you know that the San Antonio, Austin, and Killeen Temple areas are kind of just growing together now. There used to be space in between those regions, and that space is getting smaller and smaller. So actually in these 3 MPO boundaries, we're expecting about 10 million people by 2045. So we do work with the MPOs to our north and south. We want to make sure that travelers and commuters are not experiencing any kind of boundaries, that there's a seamless experience going throughout these 3 MPO regions. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a little bit about the Campo planning process. TxDOT is one of our big partners, as well as the counties and cities throughout our 6-county area. So this is a very high-level general idea of what we do for planning and how projects get to construction and implementation. So we start with local and regional plans and studies. The feasibility study that I'll talk about in just a moment is one of those local plans and studies. We did a number of these with jurisdictions, with some of the counties, and of course with TxDOT as we were developing the 2045 plan. We're already working on the 2050 plan, so our hope is that the feasibility studies that we're starting through a corridor studies program will be able to be implemented and look into those 2050 plans that we're putting together now. So phase 2 is looking at the long-range transportation plan that I was talking about here, the 2050 plan. So that looks out 25 years. We use the traffic projections, the population and employment growth, and also talk with the public to see what your needs are, not only for roadway, but also for those walking and biking and transit needs. So community input and public input is a big part of developing that 25-year program. Stage 3 is selecting and funding these projects. So that comes more into that 4-year transportation improvement program, that TIP window. So Campo does allocate funding, which I'll get to in just a moment. Our board in 2017 decided on a project selection criteria, and safety is a big factor in how our board prioritizes and selects those projects for the limited funding that we do have. So it's actually local project sponsors that submit those applications to Campo for that project implementation. So Campo does not have the ability to build or construct, maintain, or operate any kind of transportation infrastructure. It's up to the local jurisdictions, those local project sponsors like TxDOT, your cities, your counties, those jurisdictions that can maintain and operate roadways that are responsible for submitting those applications and sponsoring those projects. And then phase 4 is the project implementation, whether that is actually implementing a study or constructing a project. Next slide, please. So how do those local project sponsors get to stage 4? They're the ones that decide which projects to pursue. The 1431 feasibility study was definitely a locally driven study that Commissioner Howard was able to add to the corridor studies that Campo is conducting. So good job for her being able to do that. So as I mentioned, the cities, the counties, TxDOT, CTRMA that some of you may recognize from the 183A toll facility. They also operate other toll facilities in the region. They are also able to select sponsor some of those projects in the region. And then the other transportation agencies that we work with, Capital Metro and CARTS, who provides rural transit service. So after deciding which projects to pursue, those local project sponsors, as I mentioned, are responsible for submitting those applications to Campo for funding, doing further studies and analysis. So the feasibility studies that we are entering into are high level, kind of that step 1 process. There are further environmental studies that are required before construction. So those project sponsors are responsible for doing that additional analysis, completing any kind of engineering or detailed design and schematic, and then finally implementing those projects to construction. Next slide, please. So this is the 12 funding categories that John was talking about. So there are 12 different categories in Texas that the Texas Transportation Commission, who is TxDOT's kind of governing body, operates off of. So the ones that are highlighted in blue, categories 2, 7, and 9, are the ones that Campo has some influence on. So categories 7 and 9 are the ones that our board solely allocates. So the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program is the federal dollars that are committed for highway improvements. The Transportation Alternatives Program are more of those bike and pedestrian and transit projects. Category 2 is a fairly large amount of money that TxDOT allocates, but TxDOT has been a great partner in working with our board to decide those regional priorities and how that Category 2 money is getting allocated throughout the region. And then John did mention Category 8 and Category 11. Those are 2 other categories that TxDOT is able to allocate for safety, and then district discretionary funding is money that each of the TxDOT districts, I believe there's 25 of them right now, is that right? Yeah, 25 TxDOT districts gets discretionary funding for those districts to decide how that money is allocated throughout their regions. Next slide, please. So the regional corridor studies, these are, there's now 9, right? 9 studies that TxDOT and Campo are working on together. So these are all on-system facilities. That simply means these are TxDOT owned and operated, maintained facilities. So these are some of the larger highways, the FM roads, the RM roads, some of the US highways, and the state highways throughout our 6-county region. So we're working with TxDOT to look at some of these facilities in the region. These were based on previous plans and studies that Campo did leading up to the 2045 plan. Sure, so on system, those are owned, operated, and maintained by TxDOT. So FM1431, US 281, US 183, I-35, those larger highways throughout the region are owned, operated, maintained. They're TxDOT's responsibility. So we use the term on system to categorize those TxDOT responsible roadways. So all of these roads were identified in previous studies, and we consider the local government needs and also public outreach and what we were hearing leading up to 2045. A lot of these corridors were identified by the public and the community as needing additional improvements. We also look at traffic data, traffic counts, crash data to look to see which of these corridors, because in an ideal world, as John mentioned, we would have money to do all the improvements necessary, but we don't. So we do have to make some priorities for these studies. So these are a little bit more of an in-depth planning study. The project development and implementation will come later on, kind of in that phase 3 and 4. But the feasibility studies give us a really good step in the planning to know what is needed to get some of these improvements going. You can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So the 9 corridors that we've identified here, you can see them throughout the 6-county region. We've got Palmer Lane, and then in this area, FM1431, which I mentioned Commissioner Howard was instrumental in getting added to this corridor studies program. So you can see that FM1431 for this study does span 3 of the 6 Campo counties. It's the largest corridor, the longest corridor in this program at over 46 miles. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So a little bit about the feasibility study and some of the outcomes for this. We'll be collecting, and actually on 1431, we've already started some of that initial data collection, especially for the intersections. So we collect and look at data, whether that's traffic data, potential development that's going in along the way. We look at traffic counts, traffic operations. We get the crash data from TxDOT. We also look at some of the environmental features and constraints, which we know in this area there's a lot of environmental features to be working with. So both looking at the natural environment as well as the human environment. We use that information to go out to the public and ask the public what they're seeing, what their needs and their concerns are, and how we can use that to recommend some potential improvements. The future phases for these feasibility studies will include that detailed environmental analysis. So some of these corridors will be able to move in. It's called NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. It's federally required for a lot of the roadway improvements. So that detailed environmental analysis will happen in a future phase, as well as the detailed design, the engineering, schematics, any kind of right-of-way or utility relocation, that would be in a future phase, as well as the construction. So each of these phases that I talked about does require additional funding, but this first step in the feasibility study is a big step forward in getting this planning going and moving along. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have started. The 1431 study has not started in earnest, but we have started looking at some of the crash data. We've put together some information about the intersection crashes as well, and analyzing some of the intersections and what we're seeing there based on kind of that desktop review that Brenda mentioned. So we've got the crashes listed up here with the red dots. This is crash data so far for 2023. So you can see there's a number of crashes that are happening along the 46-mile corridor that we're going to be studying. So with that, here's my contact information. I know I've gotten emails. I appreciate the emails that we've gotten from some of you already. That helps inform our board on the region's priorities, the community's priorities. So we appreciate when we get that information. If you've got any questions, please feel free to contact me. So thank you, Commissioner Howard, again for having us.
Thank you very much. And thank you guys for writing questions beforehand. I know that when you hear information, it's maybe jogged new questions, and so maybe we can get to that. When I look through the questions, you're all asking very similar questions that have been mentioned here tonight. And one of those is left turn lanes. And so we heard from John that there's a few in the works. We will publish, get all of the questions answered and capture the information shared tonight about what's sort of coming so that people can know that. Another one you guys have written about are center turn lanes. You've also addressed that. What I didn't really hear anything about barriers. We've seen Jersey barriers on some roads. We've seen the toothpick dividers on 620. Could you guys comment about what is, if any of that would be helpful, and what does it take to make that decision?
I can hit on that a little bit. So a Jersey barrier is a concrete barrier that is placed to divide traffic. And unfortunately, when you look at a roadway typical section like 1431, where we have 12-foot lanes, 4 12-foot lanes, and a minimal center turn lane, we would be looking at that Jersey barrier is like 30 inches at the bottom. So then we're starting to look at taking away the widths from the lanes that are already out there. That's just one issue or challenge we would have. The other challenge is access to folks' property. When you put up Jersey barrier, folks are then you have to create a location for folks to be able to make a left or a U-turn, which then creates obstacles that we have to design around too, which in order to turn around a large vehicle on 1431, you're looking at widening the road or building some kind of hooded left. There's different types of innovative type intersections out there. All those cost money, and so we usually can try to get the best bang for the buck where we can with the left turn lanes is what we've been looking at, if we're going to have to get out there and widen the road anyways. The left turn lane or center turn lane provides a median also to separate traffic, which helps with the run. It helps with multiple aspects of collisions. It helps with the rear end collisions. It helps with the head-ons. It helps. And then we try to add a little bit of shoulder out there to help with the run off the roads. You ask about, we call them delineators. They're like a curb delineator system we put out there in strategic locations. We usually put them at intersections where the developer has put in a driveway, what we like to call it as a right in, right out. And folks still think they need to make a left into it when they're not supposed to. So in order to try to help enforce the actual design of the driveway, we have to put up the delineators. Those are all tools we have in our toolbox we use when we're looking at accidents and locations to try to help curb them and prevent them. So, I mean, we're willing to look at any of them, any location that we see that we're having issues like that with the left turn or rear ends or needs to be right in, right out. We're willing to up and look at it. A lot of times folks will go, that driveway ought to be a right in, right out. It's right here right at the intersection. I can't get out of it. You're right. Traffic's now made it a right in, right out. But they also don't want me, it's not very favorable with the business owners or other folks when we do take away the full access that they have. And they create other issues, like I was saying, folks making illegal U-turns, or we see that a lot. And so you mentioned 620. We have up signs out there that say no U-turn, no left turn, do not enter on right in, right out driveways. And all three of those things happen every day out there. So that becomes an enforcement issue, and that's when we partner with our locals to help try to enforce those type of movements.
All right, down at the end of the table, Chief of Police. We've talked tonight about crashes from speeding. Can you comment on the sort of volume of speeding going on 1431, and what efforts of enforcement are there?
Okay. The police chief in Jonestown, you're probably all pretty familiar with our traffic enforcement.
I actually am very familiar with it. I got a ticket.
Just to give you a rough number, or these are the numbers actually 3 days ago, but they've been out there the last 2 days. 2,629 citations in the last 12 months. We've had 89 collisions in the last 12 months. 7 of those were with injuries. We hit it pretty hard out there, but slow down, put your phones down, don't drink and drive. That's pretty much it.
Gary Boshears, Chief of Police for Lago Vista. Wow, that's loud. Our numbers are not that high. I'll say that right now. We do pretty robust traffic enforcement. You know, the thing that I'll say about traffic enforcement on 1431, in town it's fairly easy. You know, between Dodge Trail and Loman Ford in Lago Vista, that's pretty easy to do. I'm sorry, from Barquet to Loman, that's pretty easy to do. There's places for people to pull over. There's places for patrol cars to turn around. When you start getting on side of either town, it's as dangerous for us to try to do traffic enforcement in a lot of these places as it is for, you know, people to be driving. So, you know, measures that you talk about as far as, you know, turn lanes and anything else, not only is that going to help improve safety on the roadways, that's going to help us to be able to do more effective traffic enforcement. We do have a couple hundred stops on 1431 this year. I don't have an exact number because unfortunately with our current computer system, I ran the report 3 times today and it gave me 3 different numbers. But we're working on that also. But yeah, we do quite a bit of enforcement out there. But again, anything that can be done to the roadway to improve safety, it's going to make it safer and more efficient for our officers to be able to enforce the traffic laws there as well.
So one of the questions is about, you know, would reducing the speed limit help? And I've learned a lot about how we set speed limits. It requires a study, and we target like the 80th percentile of the speed most people drive, because that would be the safest speed. So out here, you know, are there portions that it would make sense to lower the speed limit, or we got to study that first to know?
You know, I'm not an expert on speed limits. There's people that are, and I think there's probably a couple sitting down there. You know, from my perspective, just a law enforcement perspective, anytime you can slow people down, that's going to help.
Okay. Brenda?
I think, yes, to reduce the speed limit, we would do a study. It's exactly what you said. We look at current speed. So what is everyone traveling at? What is their speed? And so we do look at the 85th percentile. We also look at roadway geometry, access. So if we continue to see growth and more driveways, the speed limit may be reduced. But we are going to get out here soon to look at the posted speed, and so we will be looking at, everyone's travel speed and see what we can do. Any change would have to be agreed upon with the city, and they would have to endorse it as well.
All right. So while we have mayors here and chamber folks here, I want to talk a little bit about the local project sponsor or money to sweeten the deal or have some skin in the game. At what point, I'm sure there's engineers in the room, but let's just say that the two city councils are not full of road engineers. They don't know how to come up with I don't know how to come up with our own project, right? So we've heard from Joyce that there'll be eventually a study. At what point does the local community need to get involved?
Am I on? Okay. So the conversation that we're having tonight is a very good starting point. Usually communities don't have the opportunity to get involved this early. So there's also the Corridor Studies program. I'll say it's actually the first one, I think, in the country that we're partnering with the state DOT for the MPO to be doing this kind of advanced planning work.
So where the MPO, the regional planning body, is working with TxDOT, the state body, okay?
Right, so it's actually the first partnership and the first program like this, I believe, in the country for this to happen. So we're excited about that, not only because the region's growth, but also these feasibility studies. Since they are very early in the process, it's an opportunity for the community to be involved and give their input, let us know about their needs, their concerns very early on. I know it can be a frustration for the community if they find out a project is about to happen, and that is their opportunity to give input. But because this is happening, back to my slides, basically it's step one, the community will have multiple opportunities and will be able to get involved in that very early stage to let us know what the needs are, what the concerns are, what we need to be considering. We don't live out here, we don't drive the roads as much as the residents, and don't see those near misses that aren't necessarily captured in TxDOT's crash data. So getting information like that is really helpful, and the earlier the better. And so I know that our Transportation Policy Board, our executive director, take public input and community outreach very seriously, and it's something that we strive to do a good job of. And so it's great that we're able to have this conversation now and continue these conversations with these early feasibility studies.
Okay, and then at what point, and maybe you can save this for a year from now or something, but at what point would we need to have, passed a bond in Lago Vista and Jonestown and have $3 million to contribute?
Sure, and I'll, part of that too is the federal transportation dollars that Campo allocates. It is required that there be a 20% local match to that federal dollar. So any kind of federal transportation funding can be 80% federal funding, and then it has to be a 20% match on the local side. So the projects cannot be 100% federally funded.
But TxDOT can be the local match. It doesn't mean it has to be little bitty Jonestown.
It can be the local match, it can be the county, it can be the cities pulling money together.
Okay.
It can be some of those other transportation agencies in the area. So, honestly, the earlier the better. I think from the policy board perspective that you have, that when you see the jurisdictions have that financial skin in the game, that the policy board sees that it is a true priority. Of course, knowing also that not all of the cities and the jurisdictions have the same resources, but that's where I think our policy board has been good at knowing that not all of our jurisdictions are created equally, and being able to help out some of those smaller jurisdictions with some of that additional funding.
Okay.
But it's, you know, the sooner the better that the county or whoever may be contributing that 20% can set aside that money, of course, the better.
Okay. I have 2 more questions, and then Bridget, I'm going to turn it over to you to see if you have questions or comments. The 2 other questions, one is, when we see fire hydrants going in out by Tessera and by the city and the park, is that an indication of more development to come, or what are those fire hydrant looking things about? Fire chief?
Those fire hydrants are to put out fires. That's, and I'm guessing, because we're not really involved in that, in the infrastructure of the development of the city, and that comes through the I'm assuming Public Works and the developers, but one would assume, which is dangerous, that they are expecting more development in those areas.
Sigh. Okay, the second one, the last question, then before I turn it over to Commissioner Shea, is it's maybe historical, but when you drive out 1431 from here towards Marble Falls, the road looks different. Between here and Cedar Park, it's narrow, there's not much drainage space, you know, it's just somebody's fence or business or driveway. The closer you get to Marble Falls, there's a lot more room. Was the road, can somebody just, none of us were probably alive when the road was first built, but why does it happen that way? It's a question somebody wants to know.
That is a good question. I wasn't around either back when the farm to market road and rural to market was developed. So back in the day, I know that they turned a lot of the county roads to state roads, and TxDOT took over the maintenance of what is out there, such as FM1431 for Lago Vista West. And it has become demand. A lot of the money that we have in our 10-year plan, the demand has been towards the city where the folks have been, and that's where we have been spending a lot of the funding over the years. I think that it's a great start right now, having this feasibility study in the works to up and come up with a plan to help reserve right-of-way and look at the future of 1431 and what it needs to look like, all the way from 35 all the way to Marble Falls. So I think that's a great thing with the route we're going.
All right. Bridget, you could come up here or use that mic, whatever you want to do.
I broke my ankle walking the dog. I broke my ankle walking the dog, and I've got a Franken boot on, so I'm going to sit here and make a few comments and ask some questions. I am retired from Campo, so I appreciate the people that are on it and serving on it. I am really interested to know in a little more detail, so Doyce, this might be a question for you. What is the process for the regional corridor study on 1431? Is it one where you got the crash data, got all the information about speed and that kind of thing? Will you be trying to figure out where to put maybe more turn lanes, more center lanes, more lights? Will you be looking at widening, so potentially acquiring right-of-way, removing some businesses, maybe taking away some portions of lawn? I think it would be really helpful for people to have a better understanding of what's in the mix for the consideration with the corridor study. So I'm really interested to hear that. And then
well, hold it. Let's go one at a time. Can you
Okay.
respond to that?
Sure.
come back.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that question. So the high-level feasibility studies that we're looking at, as I mentioned, we are looking at the traffic counts, the projected traffic counts, the development that's coming in. So these high-level initial feasibility studies will be looking to see what the concerns are, what the needs are, and then just looking at some high-level recommendations. It won't be specifically saying, you know, this is just off the top of my head, we need to have like a 6-lane roadway with 12-foot shoulders and a center turn lane the entire length or something like that. So it'll be looking to see what those needs are and then having some high-level recommendations. It could be some of the short-term improvements that I think TxDOT and John are very good at looking at those short-term improvements to see what can happen now, what are we needing midterm, and then longer term based on population and development and traffic that's happening in the area. What do we think is going to be needed in the next 25 years? As you know, Commissioner Shea, from having served on Campo, not all of the funding comes at once. And so we have to, a lot of times, have those short, mid, and long-term improvements and have that program as that money comes available. And a lot of times, those longer-term improvements are not needed today. That's one of the roles of the MPOs, to be looking out 25 years to see what is going to be potentially needed and be working towards that with TxDOT and our local partners.
So, in terms of the time frame, should people be understanding that you're talking about a 25-year time frame on this corridor study? You mentioned it. She mentioned a 25-year time frame, so I'm trying to clarify this. What kind of time frame are we realistically looking at?
So the short, mid, long-term improvements, that could be over the 25-year. A lot of those short-term improvements we usually look at, you know, in the tomorrow to 3-year time frame. We look at midterm improvements that look, you know, in the next like 10 or so years, and then those longer term improvements. So it could be, you know, some of those shorter term improvements, and I know that TxDOT is already doing some analysis on their own and looking for any kind of opportunities to make those safety improvements. So it doesn't necessarily have to hinge on what Campo finds in these feasibility studies with TxDOT as our partner. The district, I know, is always looking for opportunities to make some of those safety improvements as they're able.
And actually, I think that's how we were able to get some short-term improvements along 620 near Steiner Ranch. There were horrible head-on collisions there, similar conditions to 1431, high speed, curved roads, bad sight lines, and we got TxDOT to put in the Jersey barriers. They had more roadway to work with. They had a much wider road surface out there. So they were able to put in the Jersey barriers. And I think TxDOT also put down a different kind of road surface that made it less prone to cars sliding. You know, when it did rain, whenever we remember when that was. So if you can talk a little bit about that and what that process was, because that happened much more quickly, partly because there were some really horrible accidents and there was a lot of community demand for quicker action. But if any of you can talk about that, I think that'd be useful for people to understand as well.
I can touch base a little bit on 620. So you're correct. 620 had a much wider footprint. And the biggest thing on 620 was access to property. By putting down the Jersey barrier on 620, we had a preserve, a large Balcones Canyonland preserve on one side and the lake on the other, and we weren't restricting access to folks. So it was a lot easier to up and take the existing roadway because there was not folks using the left turn lane that was out there. So it was easy for us to go put the Jersey barrier right down the middle. I think you asked about something else besides this 620, the road, the porous friction course. So we were fortunate, I'm gonna say it was around 2007 or so, we were able to put this porous friction course, we call it PFC, on 1431. And what it does, to an extent, when it rains, it lets the water kind of drain through it and out. And it helps with the skid and also the overspray on folks' windshield when they're driving down the road. That was a much welcomed safety measure we up and were able to install on 1431, and it gets dated, and over time the pores start to clog and it starts to break down due to the heavy traffic, and we are looking at repaving 1431. I believe it's in 2026, and again we'll go back with this same type of asphalt, this porous friction course, PFC, to help with the skid, the friction, and then also the wet weather accidents.
Aren't you glad I'm asking these questions about time frame for when this is going to happen? And then I saw this happen at Campo, and some of it was related to the 620 improvements. It made a difference when residents came to the meeting and just talked about what was happening on their roadways and the help that they needed, and requesting that Campo make their project a higher priority. Do you have any sense for the prioritization of these corridor studies? I didn't know if they were in order of priority on the sheet, or what's the prioritization, and how much impact does community and citizen participation have at Campo?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So there's actually 2 of the 9 corridors that the studies have started on so far. So that's FM1431. Most of us know that as Palmer Lane. And then FM973 has also started. We're in the works with TxDOT to also look at FM969. So FM1431, we don't have a specific date that study is going to kick off officially. As I mentioned, we've already started looking at some of that initial crash information, especially at the intersections, and doing some of that back-end analysis before we get started officially with that. Definitely having that public comment helps, letting the policy board members know what the concerns are that you have. We always have comments open. If you want to come in and speak with the policy board, we do have a public comment period at the beginning of each of those meetings. Typically our board meets the 2nd Monday of the month. This October it'll be the 1st Monday, so that'll be October 2nd, and we meet kind of on the northwest side of Austin, and those meetings are posted on the Campo website, campotexas.org. There's a calendar there. It shows you the location, the meeting time. There's also meeting agendas that are posted to that, and an email address if you want to send in any kind of comments to our board. Those comments are forwarded to our board ahead of each of the meetings.
All right, just to reiterate that, the public comment helps. So this is an opportunity, another way that the community can weigh in and move the priority for the work on this road up to higher on the list. Thank you. Thanks for...
Yep. All right, it's almost 8 o'clock, so we're going to wrap it up. I'll hang out for just a few more minutes if anybody wants to come down here and shed some light on something they heard tonight. I wanted to recognize a couple of folks that didn't get to talk. And one is Charlie Watts. Charlie is one of the county road long-range planning folks that keeps us all on the straight and narrow. And then Kyle is the assistant engineer for the Austin area, Georgetown area. So we thank you for being out here with us tonight. Jennifer, did we forget anything? All right, do y'all have 5 minutes? Okay. Well, most of them I mentioned were lots of left turns, center lanes, and but we can take a few questions right there at the mic. And we also said we'd publish answers to all of the questions. You're right.
Good evening. Am I coming through okay? Okay, good. I'm going to call my stuff things we can do now. As you pointed out, this is a long-range plan you all have. But we have some very short-range uses of 1431 that we can do some things to improve ourselves, groups of citizens and so forth. I and some friends have done some very serious thinking about these problems from the standpoint, from how the user uses the roads and what the problems are associated with the two different kinds of applications. We have routine applications that we've all talked about and we all do. We have emergency applications, which you gentlemen down here are specialists in. And the particular ones that we have been concerned with are those that are outstanding in the news today, and that is forest fires. And right now we're set for the world's greatest forest fire. We have 50 days of drought or so, above 100, et cetera. You know all that so well. There are things roadblocks we would hit immediately trying to use 1431. If we have a fire, that's the assumption, and it's very real if you consider the news and think about Paradise, California, where they burned in the cars. So how do you get from here to there when you get a call on the phone or however that the place is on fire and to evacuate? Okay, first thing is, how do we get out of here and where the heck do we go? Because getting out becomes a real problem. Our houses have moved into the forests, and that's our fault, but it's a wonderful, beautiful place to be. So that is happening all over the country. And the news carries all kinds of sad stories about people who didn't plan ahead as to how you protect. Can you do it in place? Probably not. Can you do it somewhere else? Well, that's the big question. How do we get somewhere else? So if you look at your particular situation, take ours here in Lago, right across the street practically, the access from your home onto the street is pretty good. However, the street runs in some circle or it's dead end. And so if it's dead end, you've got to go, everybody has to go one way out, and the fire truck wants to come in. That doesn't work. On a bigger scale, if you look at Boggy Road and go from the red light on Boggy to the Y that takes you off to the north side, that road goes around the circle and joins Highland, and everything that comes out of the south part of town has to come out through Boggy Road, and it's 2 lanes, joins 2 lanes, joins 2 lanes. Finally, you got to crash at the intersection. And so how can we solve that problem? And because the fire trucks got to get in. Well, our group has been studying all these problems. We would like to get together with some of you all and share what the users are seeing. And if I could meet with somebody here to find out who to get with.
Sure, we welcome that, and we'll get the fire chief and to comment and meet with you about that.
Tom Hildner, 2802 Lomans Ford. Yeah, I'm a little disappointed, honestly. Coming here, I thought there was going to be a plan. We have head-on fatalities every day, almost. I mean, I almost was in a head-on today. I had a truck to my right, a semi came over the double yellow, and I missed by literally less than an inch. And here we're talking about, I understand bureaucracy and red tape and stuff, but I think the solution's pretty clear. We need a divided highway all the way from Lomans Ford all the way to New Hope, in my opinion. And we need to start on it now. We got land for sale. You're going to have developers developing right up to the land, and then you're going to try to take it back from them. We need to annex that land now, get the money. I don't know where it comes from, whether it comes from the government, whether it's a bond. I don't like taxes either, but I think everybody here our family safety is more important than a few extra bucks. So whatever we need to do to accelerate this needs to happen.
Thank you.
We can't have head-ons anymore.
So just to everyone here, I mean, one thing too that they've been saying is it is making sure as citizens we're getting involved. So we will be posting information on who you need to be reaching out to. They have to hear us. And we have to make sure that 1431 stays in their mouths and in their minds. So really, it's coming together as a community.
I'll be quick instead of everybody else, but two real quick questions. Number one, I live here in Lago, but sometimes I go to Marble Falls. How about 10 gallons of white paint where you guys have that big left turn lane in the middle of nowhere and turn those into passing lanes? Well, a third question, who put in those pull over the slow people lanes that way? That was a full waste of money. It's kind of like if you know you're stupid, nobody does. I've followed people going 42 miles an hour and they don't pull over. And so don't do that again. Don't do that in the whole state. Just, okay. The third thing is a plan B, a bridge, a road to Liberty Hill, something, because whenever we do have a wreck, Lago Vista just done, it's done. I mean, we're just shut down. And so we talked about a bridge probably 20 years ago, probably way before y'all's time. I think it was in 2020, somewhere in there. And Lakeway shut it down big time. Well, we're as big as Lakeway. We have as much money as they do at this point, and we need, you know, another way to get in.
Thank you.
Okay, mine's real brief. I got a question for the PEs. When you model a place, I'm talking about the intersection on 1431 going east from Lago Vista. When you model that, okay, you did the work on it. Do you do any after modeling, go back and look at what you did?
So the modeling would be for modifications, but there's signal timing that gets adjusted, you know, should we get a call.
You don't have to go any farther.
So this is...
You don't have to go any farther. What about concern is, and it's real big concern, and probably no one here, I may be the only person that lives on Reed Park Road, but the money y'all spent there, a couple $1 million where it was, really and truly, that intersection is worse now than it was. If you're going east and try to turn right on the west entrance, you have to almost stop. The other day, a big truck almost hit me in the rear end because the only thing that saved me is he got in that right, in the other lane. Now, why didn't you put a right turn lane there for one? That's one. I don't answer that yet. Number two, why did you make the queue going west so short? And three, why do I have to make a U-turn when I turn onto that road to go back up Reed Park Road? Enough said. You don't have to answer it now, but you say the best.
So I can kind of explain that corner for you, what he's talking about coming back in if you're heading to Cedar Park, because I used to live off Reed Park Road. It's when cars are coming out, you would have to pretty much come to a complete stop because it is a full U-turn. So y'all have the turn lane for the cars that are heading into Lago from Cedar Park to turn in, but coming the other way, you literally have to come to almost a complete stop. And again, you know, I've shared this with people before, used to live off Reed Park Road, amazing view off of Grandview Lane, and we actually moved because, I mean, one time it took me 7 turns to get home because I could not turn into my street. I kept having to go to Lago's light, Jonestown light, Lago light, because cars would just come behind you and you're pumping your brakes and they are just not stopping, and you have blind spots coming over that hill.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll be also quick. My name is Zee Goldstein. I live in Jonestown. I'm probably representing the younger crowd that moved here from other states. So probably I've seen other roads in other states. There's not a day that I don't skip a heartbeat when I turn left from East Lakeview Drive, where Jonestown city limit starts with that hill, where you take the first street left. That is a death trap to anyone. We are a small community in that area. Not too many take that left. But every time I take that left, I don't know if I'm gonna be side-ended and side-collided by a car or by a truck or by anyone, because probably the chiefs knows that nobody goes 45 there. 45 plus minus, right? There's always a tolerance, 5 miles per hour, so consider that as a 50. So my question is, why do you need a feasibility study? And I'm an engineer also. Why do you need a feasibility study if I drive in every other city in Texas that has 35 miles per hour limit when you get to a city limit actual area? And Lago has that, sorry for comparing, but you guys have the 35 and 40 miles per hour. Why does Jonestown have 45? From a 50 to 45 and not from a 50 to 35. That will help us a lot in the short range without a feasibility study of 2 or 3 years, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is De La Rosa. I live in a small community, this Travis Peak community, up the road about 8-9 miles from here, off of 1431. One of the most dangerous areas and piece of roadway is from Lago Vista to Travis Peak. It is a scenic road that has winding roads up and down the hills. Guardrails along that roadway are about 1 foot to 1.5 foot off the side. Thereby, a driver doesn't have much area to move. It is a one-lane road one way and one the other. Now, here's the real question, is that this 8 to 10 mile roadway, when in your plans, strategic planning, as I heard earlier, some span 20 to 25 years. Travis Peak is a growing community that most of the people that live there pay from $10,000 to $24,000 a year in taxes. That piece of roadway, there's no common courtesy from most drivers that drive that road. I drive that roadway from here to Jonestown and on. If you look at the drivers that drive on 1431 from this short span, there's a lot of heavy duty trucking, a lot of speedsters. There's only 2 areas there that have area where slow traffic can move to the right, and not much room is there. And a lot of them are uncourteous. They go slowly, and there's a convoy behind them. It is very dangerous. So when in the planning, is that road going to be widened? Is it in your plans?
We heard tonight, we're neighbors, we heard tonight that the widening type things, adding lanes, is what does come out of these plans that can take 3 to 5 to 10 to 25 years. So what I promise you, that every question y'all submitted, we will get answers to and publish those through Jennifer or make them available on your website. And if you want to reach myself or Bridget or TxDOT, Jennifer, can you help us also make that info? I mean, you can easily find Ann Howard and Bridget Shea. But
Yeah.
if you need to go through Jennifer, we're in communications a lot. For those of you who don't know, I'm here every week. My husband's up there. We have a house off of Singleton Bend Road. And, you know, this is, I'm your county commissioner and Bridget's your county commissioner. And you can, I mean, we're here because we want to get your answers and to get these resources to bear on this road as fast as possible. So thank you all for coming tonight. It was a great turnout.
And I do really just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And again, you have to start somewhere. So this was the start. And I'm not going to say next week there's going to be turn lanes all down 1431 and everything that we want, but it is a start. And it's, again, we have to come together as a community and make sure our voices are heard. We cannot wait for someone else to do what we need done. So it's very important. Again, I will send out all the information, what we need to do, what meetings we need to go to. And thank you, everyone, for coming out today and talking to us.
One more thing, Jennifer, I'll listen to this man in the blue, and I wanted to thank Lucy Oglesby on my team who pulled this together.
Yes, thank you, Lucy.
And Mick Long, who got the maps together with Charlie. Okay, last comment right here,
And then
Jennifer.
please make sure you mark on the maps when you leave, because they're taking that back to look at the problem areas that you are showing them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I have one very quick question for John. You mentioned the warrant studies. Can you tell us when those were studied and how long those studies were? That's a simple question.
You're talking about signals. They've been studied in the last 6 months. And you were talking about signal warrants, right? Yeah. Yeah, we try to do them when school is in session because that's a higher demand traffic.
Please be safe going home.